Hi, everyone. I'm Pascal Hansen, CEO and financial strategist at Zada, which is a business advisory firm servicing North America. We help business owners achieve more through business planning, education, and consulting. One thing that makes us unique is that we work with a vast network of vetted experts and strategic partners to help our clients to keep thriving. What follows is an excerpt from a conversation I had with Kindi Gill a few years ago on the topic of permanent healing. Kindi is a health and wellness catalyst. She's a conscious leadership consultant and a sought-after professional speaker. She's a former CEO of a private company responsible for more than 3,000 people nationally in the UK, and she has 30 plus years of experience in leadership and change management. Today, Kindi specializes in the transformation of busy leaders and executives, helping them to achieve optimal emotional health and wellness. She guides them to access their peaceful presence, helping her clients to prevent burnout by silencing the source of their stressed out mental and emotional triggers. I hope you enjoy the following conversation.
Today, I'm very happy to have with me a very special guest. Her name is Kindi Gill. I met Kindi quite a few years ago now. I don't remember how many, but I attended a networking event. It was actually the eWomen's Network. I'd never heard of the eWomen's Network. I saw an ad on LinkedIn, and it was in my neighborhood at the Arbutus Club, so I thought, I'm just going to go check it out. And at that event, mostly women entrepreneurs, obviously, because it's the eWomen's Network. There were a few males. And when Kindi stood up to explain who she was and what she did, I was absolutely fascinated by her story. I'm like, wow, I've never heard anything like that before. And then a couple of weeks later, I was actually triple booked for networking events and ran from one to the next. I think it was a women in finance dinner. I came in right before they started speaking before dinner, and there was one spot left. I don't believe in coincidence, and it was right next to Kindi, and I'm like, I remember her because her story was so compelling, and I remember the name as well. I don't always remember names, but I remember it's Kind with an I, and she was very kind. Anyway, we sat down and have known each other since. She does amazing work. I have sent clients to her that have had great results. So that all sounds very mysterious. So welcome, Kindi. Thanks for being here. And please introduce yourself and tell us the story, how you came about doing what you do and what you do.
Thanks for inviting me here, Pascal. It's so sweet that you remember the entire story of how we met.
Yes, and that's rare, so.
Pretty special. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Kindi, and I'm actually in a line of work that I never expected to be in. So that's the place that I'd like to begin in, because you can hear from my voice, English background, and we emigrated to Canada, to Vancouver, back in 2006. And it was supposed to be about a retirement and sort of living out the rest of my days fairly peacefully and quietly at home. But things didn't transpire quite like that, because when I first arrived here, I fell into a depression. Being so isolated from everything that I knew and understood about my life prior to that. And although we all speak English in Canada, it wasn't quite as smooth running, the emigration, as I had hoped. And it was really my first experience of slowing down enough to hear everything that was going on in my head. Because prior to that, I'd been extremely busy and hadn't really had a decent enough relationship with the thoughts that were going on in my own mind. And it was my first encounter with true loneliness. And that began the path that I'm now on, and with the work that I do with sharing medallion method.
And so can you start a little bit, because I think a lot of the people that will be listening and the people I will encourage to listen to this once it gets posted is you had that very fast-paced life of being an executive, CFO, a lot of people under you, alpha female, if I may use that term, family to take care of, go, very successful. So coming from that, and I think we all have to work with that sort of elusive work-life balance. How do we get it all done? So can you speak a little bit about what that life was like before you came here? Because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, so prior to coming to Canada, I was the chief executive of an organization that was running out of Kent in England, but we had about 600 locations that we were servicing. And I employed around 3,000 people. It was in facilities management, working for the retail sector. And so it was an extremely, extremely stressful life. And it had taken a long time through sort of the career progression of going through becoming a chartered accountant first, then going into management consultancy, then into corporate finance, then becoming a finance director, and then climbing the ladder to become the chief executive. And I was just pursuing what typically we feel is like the Western dream of trying to make it to the top and earn money and have these lavish things around us. And truthfully, all of that comes at a very, very heavy price because we don't know that we're really eating adrenaline every morning, and that's the experience that we're going through, fight or flight response as we go through a very, very heavy loaded day with extreme pressures from clients and customers and from your own staff. And so that was the life that I was living prior to coming to Vancouver.
Right. So that's an important part of the story, wouldn't you say?
Well, it's an important part of the backdrop of how slowing down to not doing much was such a massive shock for me, because a lot of my identity was wrapped around accomplishment, around targets, around goals, and I didn't give much respect to typical little things that I thought were really menial, like, preparing a meal or cleaning the kitchen or some domestic chores. Like, I hadn't given enough respect to any of those tasks. I had seen them as being rather irrelevant. And it was a massive identity crisis having to fall into tasks like that when I'd been so used to having housekeepers and nannies and gardeners and people helping me in that other crazy
delegation,
life.
Yeah.
In that other crazy life that I'd been leading. And so really what I came to experience when I came to Vancouver was a massive identity crisis of understanding who I was without the outside labels of accomplishment, and what was my relationship with myself and what was driving me to be so busy and so crazy in the world that I was living in.
So then you fall into this lonely depression, and then what happened?
For a while, I was back into there must be a solution. So I didn't really understand that I'd ever been lonely, or that I even had those fears of being alone. I didn't understand that I was so identified with the tasks that I was doing, and that what would happen to me when I wasn't busy with all those tasks. So initially what happened was, when I knew that I wasn't feeling too good, I started to sort of look for solutions. And I did a lot of what we would typically do with sort of self-help ideas. So I started to read Eckhart Tolle's work on the New Earth, and I read Marianne Williamson's work, and I read work on forgiveness and all sorts of concepts that were designed, and the power of now and positivity and the law of attraction, all sorts of concepts trying to follow why the thoughts that were in my head were so sabotaging and what could be done about them. So really it became an intellectual task to solve the intellectual problem of the thoughts that were arising. And for about 2 years, I probably read everything that I could get my hands on. And although I experienced some changes in trying to focus my attention more on being more grateful and focus my attention more on seeing the positive of each day, I soon realized that that wasn't really enough to sort of, I'll use the word cure. That wasn't really enough to cure anything, because the thoughts were still arising. And now I was having to manage them separately and differently. And I got to the point where I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is just a really bizarre way of living, of having to put this deliberate intention into addressing what's going on in my head. And as I gave up, thinking that what I was now exploring wasn't really enough, miraculously, a book fell off the shelf in chapters, and the book was entitled In Search of the Miraculous, with a subtitle that I didn't understand, Healing into Consciousness, by an author here based in Vancouver, Eliza Madadalian. And so what happened was, when I took that book home, I realized that everything I'd been doing was working with my mental head, trying to change my mental thinking, when really the resolution was in the cells of my body. And if I could turn the thoughts off from where they're originating, there was the true respite to what was going on in my head. And a new journey opened up as soon as I opened up that book called Healing into Consciousness by Mother Eliza Dalian. The book title is actually In Search of the Miraculous. So that changed the whole trajectory. It changed the whole concept of reliance on your head to now a new relationship of trying to follow actually what's going on in my body, which was very, very new because I'm an academic. I've learned everything logically. I've done my entire career through my mind and its brilliance. So this was a very, very new world to step into, trying to find solutions that were about what was feeding the mind in the first place.
So I think I recall correctly when I say you probably read that book in one sitting because you were fascinated by it. And then what? Did you read it again? Did you contact her? What happened next?
I actually did something very odd. I opened up the book. I read the first page. I was in the second paragraph of the first page, and it was talking about human suffering. And I was crying as I was reading this because it felt like, oh my God, there's like every single word here is just full of truth. And something stopped me from continuing reading at a very, very fast pace. I put the book aside and I looked to see who the author was. I Google searched her name and discovered that Mother Eliza Dalian was actually living here in Vancouver, which was really bizarre because that's where I'd emigrated to. And then I went onto her website, sat there for about 7 hours, read every single page of every single thing that was written on her website, went onto her YouTube channel, watched every video that was there. And by the end of that night, Pascal, I was ready to stalk her. Like, I was like, oh my God, I need to
a raving fan to the extreme.
Yeah. Instantly. Like, it was like, oh my God, I need to meet this woman because she's definitely talking truth and she's definitely talking concepts that I haven't yet understood. So by the time I'd scanned her entire website, there was a page on there that said, book a session. And I plugged my details in, asking for a session with her, which was a one-on-one appointment that took place on the 6th of October, 10th of October, 2008. And honestly, Pascal, going and experiencing the Dalian method directly with her was a very, very life-changing moment for me. And the thoughts that were fueling the depression just dissipated and evaporated. And the angst that was in my stomach just I don't know where it vanished to. This concept of consciousness or healing into consciousness, which was the subtitle of her book, I hadn't tasted what expansion of consciousness really feels like in your body. But when I met her that day, I did. And so all I knew was my life has changed. My thinking has changed. I feel different. And I don't understand why, right? That's like, it was like so much has changed, but I don't understand why. And this feels like the miracle, but again, I don't understand why. So then I ended up actually volunteering and helping.
And so can you describe what that session is like? Is it similar to the sessions you do now, or has that changed?
Yeah. So it's similar but different. So the sessions I do now are because I'm now trained as a facilitator of the Dalian method, which at that time I wouldn't have realized would be my destiny. So the sessions I do now are aimed at helping people to discover the source of the thinking that's taking place. And then once we help them to discover the source of the thinking that's taking place, we then help them to transform that so that it gets erased from the cells of the body, which is at the epigenetic layer, so that the quality of the thinking spontaneously changes from inside out. When I visited Mada back in 2008 at that time, she wasn't so much helping me to source what was inside my body or teaching me how to find that, because that's more my job now as a facilitator, because she's basically like a human X-ray machine that's able to hear everything auditorily that's going on inside you. She just asked me to follow the instructions. So she was hearing it, telling me what was going on inside me, and I was then releasing according to her formula that she's created in the Dalian method. It's like an antiviral program, really, for human beings. And so that session with her was more like a really expedited way of hunting what was inside you that was sabotaging you, but more importantly, to then understand the lessons behind the experience I was having. So there's always a reason for why we're having our worldly life run the way that it does. And so the Dalian method, through the power of consciousness, helps you to see the lesson behind your life experience too. Me, it was a bit like going to a washing machine, like a washing machine that sort of, you go into a washing machine and then you come out and you're like, I feel so clean, but how did that happen?
So does she have this special talent where she can do it sort of telling you what to do because she has that gift, and then everyone she trains like yourself, you learn to apply the formula? Or do you need to have a special gift? Or is it part of, intuition that everyone can practice and get more in tune with, if that makes sense?
Hers is a very rare gift, and it comes about because at the age of 33 years old, she had a massive awakening experience called enlightenment. And that's a very, very rare thing for a human being to go through. And it only tends to happen when there's a huge amount of purity inside the person, and a lot of the old sort of ego antics and the nonsense that divides people from one another has fallen away and been transformed. So that arose for her at age 33 after years and years and years of dedication to meditation and her own inner spiritual surge. But the gift of being able to hear what is going on in other human beings, and she actually has an associated gift of being able to see the energy inside people, which comes up in different shades. So that part that is unconscious that we're not aware of is a little bit darker and a little bit grayer inside people. And the part inside us that is light driven and conscious can be seen as light. So she can see those two shades inside people too. So the combination of being able to see and being able to hear helped her to create a formula that acts as a consistent way of eliminating sabotaging experiences from our lives. And so once she created that formula, there's only one of her on the planet with this extremely powerful and very, very unique gift. She then felt it was important that we should be able to have access to that formula in a way where we're able to use it more independently of her. And then that's where people like myself came in. So we started to get trained many, many years later. I think my training with her was, I think, if I recollect correctly, the beginning of 2015. No, sorry. Mm-hmm. That's right.
2009.
Yeah, the beginning of 2015, that's correct. So my training didn't happen until 2015, even though I met her in 2008. And at that point, what she started to do was teach people how to access what is inside them so that they can make the connection with their own body. And it could be that sometimes you have to have 2 sessions or maybe 3 sessions with the Dalian method when you've learned how to access what's inside you yourself. And so 2 or 3 sessions on your own may have the same sort of potency as one experience with her. But the purpose is for her wanting each of us to become independent enough to be able to become like the masters of our own lives and the healers of our own lives, and to get to a place where we're accessing our own power systematically at the pace and the speed at which we want to take our own evolution. So nothing's being forced on you too fast or too rushed, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we all in life, I think, believe in our human journey, have our issues for growth and development. And so everyone has their own baggage, if you will. So, but I know with the Dalian method, it's some of that trauma, it goes from generation to generation. And when we're talking about epigenetics, it's sitting there in your cells. Yes. And with this method, it's sort of cleaning it up on the cellular level. Am I correct in saying that? So can you explain a little bit about how that trauma gets stuck in the genes and how it can be cleaned up permanently?
Yeah, so what's happening is there's multiple layers that affect us. One is our personal story, so everything that we've already experienced in our life to date, depending on however old we are now. There are many, many experiences that we go through where we make conclusions about the trauma that we've experienced. And the trauma can be simple, like you've been left at home alone and your parents have popped out for a short while and you've concluded that, oh my God, they're never coming back. It could be as simple as that, or it could be extremely traumatic, like sexual abuse or neglect or a variety of things, right? So there's a personal layer of what goes on in our body. But also on top of that is the genetics. So we're born with the combination of our mother and father's genes. And so any unfinished business in them, so I'll just give you an example. So say, for example, we've had a parent that typically gets extremely angry, and a parent that isn't able to manage their emotions too easily and sort of loses it a lot. Well, that imprint of getting angry could get passed on to the next generation, or even a grandfather that had that view, or a great-grandfather or a great-grandmother or whatever. So what happens is generationally, certain patterns that run in families keep moving along in the genetics that we inherit. And so they affect us. So that becomes like the collective layer that is not specifically just to our personal journey, but it's combined with the journeys of people around us. And then on top of that, Pascal, we also have like a sort of a layer even beyond that, which is to do with, like the collective layer will have our ancestral imprints, but it'll also have imprints that come from society, teachings from religions, like even this conversation that we've just had, we started here. Like, why are we driven to be successful? Like, is that some sort of hypnosis in the air that we're all driven by, or is it actually a personal choice that we're making? So all these things affect us. The environment affects us, and then even the cosmic state, like in terms of what's happening in the universe around us, that affects us too. So all these things form and inform the way we behave. And if we're behaving in a way that we know is not serving us or other people, then there'll always be an original imprint in the DNA that's driving that behavior. And of course, the Dalian method is then designed to unhook you from that so that you can reach more of your own fulfillment, and also at the same time get to that state of true happiness that you're able to access from inside, that can't be given to you by anything that you ever attain at a successful level on this planet, right? It's something that can only be done and claimed from inside you.
So once that gets cleaned up, for lack of a better term, and now you've had sessions with you, now you have tools to use to get you centered. Let's say you stop practicing that and then you get into a stressful time in your life,
Yeah.
would any of those old scripts come back, or is it permanently gone and maybe you're just not using the tools and you're just going through a stressful episode without the multiple layers that were sort of eradicated the first time around?
Every time you use the Dalian method, what happens is the change that arises is permanent. So you can't unsee something that you've seen. And because its purpose is always to make you more conscious and driven.
You can't go back then.
You can't go backwards ever.
Okay.
Because, and also the cells have altered, so the change is
so it is permanent.
It's permanent. However, now having said that, there are multiple branches that come out of one tree trunk, right? So you've got this big tree trunk, and then you've got a whole host of branches that are feeding you. So what happens is you may deal with a layer. Let's deal with the simple thing. Like, for example, you and I are having a conversation here, right? And say this was in a public forum with thousands and thousands of people in front of us. It could be that one of us could be affected by the fear that, you know, you're being visible, or you could be affected by the fear of being criticized, or you could be affected by the fear of like the fear to be rejected, right? That's 3 different branches to do with being visible. The fear to be visible, the fear to be criticized, the fear to be rejected, right? So what can happen is multiple sessions give you the opportunity to address yet another branch that is relevant to your story and relevant to the way that you're behaving, but it's another angle that helps to strengthen you. So really, the way that Madda often talks about the Dalian method is that if you think of yourself, as a vessel or a container, and you've got all these fears that are going on, if these fears are permanently part of your life, they act as like little leakages, right? So like if you were a balloon and you were trying to pump air into a balloon, well, the balloon's not going to fill up because there's all these little leakages and the air is just going to keep dissipating back out again. And so because the balloon's not filling up, you're not really accessing your real strength. So what the Dalian method does is it almost acts as a Band-Aid, sort of closing off every hole of the balloon until you get to a point where, like, when you're pumping air into it, then it expands, and then it expands a bit more, and then it expands a bit more, because it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's you accessing your real innate strength and your real innate beautiful qualities, right? That purity of the capacity to love, the compassionate part, the part that's capable of being extremely kind to other people. Like, you start anchoring yourself a lot more in that state of consciousness rather than the ego state that is riddled with fear. Got it.
And so with the people you help, and I believe you're one of the few people trained in this method qualified to deal with children. Is that correct?
There are 3 levels of training that take place. So we have training that takes place with adults, then with teenagers, then with children. And so I think that, I can't remember how many there are of us in terms of facilitators trained worldwide. There could be around 15, 16 of us now. And each of us have got a different story or a different bias as to how we came into this work, right? Because none of us came into it planning on becoming trained. We all came into the work because there was something going on in our life that wasn't serving us. And we were wanting to sort of, let's put it the phrase, like repair our own life, right? And so my particular bias when I came into this work was driven by the conflict that was arising in my family home between my husband and I. And it was driven by a bias of the fact that I am a mother of 3 children. And the minute I saw how empowering this method was, and I got introduced to it at the age of 42, I didn't want to miss out the chance on introducing this to my children really, really early, because why let them suffer and go through life hurting through their leakages and the imprints they've picked up from us, they may as well start addressing them sooner, right, and have a better life. So
of course, yeah.
My particular bias became very much about the dynamics of what happens in a family home and how, as the matriarch of a family home, you can bring about peace for each member of the family, and that they could be able to overcome silly things, but they affect us all the time. So silly things like jealousy that arises, or silly things like comparison, comparing myself to one another, or things like judgment, where we're judging each other for a decision or something that's happened, right? So my whole bias became very much about how do I use the Dalian method to erase and transform the blind spots in family members, particularly if I can do that with children early on, then they don't have to suffer in the long term. And so other facilitators, like some of my co-facilitators, like one of them's come from an angle of sexual abuse. So she's got a huge amount of knowledge and a huge amount of understanding very specifically about that type of trauma, and is able to help people to be able to deal with that much more proficiently than, say, I would be able to.
Right.
Even though I'm using the same tool, because her personal journey has walked through that, whereas my personal journey has walked through the nuances of running a peaceful family life.
Right. And so for those people listening, you're able to help people with sessions, and it doesn't have to be in person. So if they're listening and they're in Montreal, for example, you can do this via Skype. You can do this, Skype and in person, correct?
Yeah, correct. I work with people in person if they're local to me. But if they're at a distance, I mean, I have clients in England and in America and all sorts of different places, in Montreal, whatever, right? And so what they do is they'll, like this week, I just had a client from Singapore. So what they do is they connect, but we connect via Zoom so that I can still physically see them. And because the process is about teaching them how to have the relationship with their own body and to access the things that are not working, the session is very interactive and step-by-step instruction-based until you get to the point where, a little bit like learning how to ride a bike, you then know how to ride it on your road, right? And so then if something else crops up later and you don't feel that you want to make an investment to have someone facilitate that for you, progressively you become capable of being able to use the method on your own. And I love working with parents, particularly.
Yes, parents. Yeah, I know. So, and tell people how they can contact you.
They can contact me through my website, which is www, and then my name, kindigill.com, KINDIGILL.com. Or they can come on to Facebook. And I have obviously my own page there, but I've got my business page there, which is Spark Expansion, SPARK, and then Expansion. And I've got a platform there for people to be able to ask questions and pose anything that they want. And I'm always happy to do complimentary conversations so people can ascertain whether what we're doing in terms of the work that we do is an appropriate fit for them and they feel comfortable about embarking on this journey, so that they don't have to commit to anything unless they've had that complimentary conversation. And that's available. I think there's a space somewhere on my website allowing them to just, hook in with me to do that.
Perfect. I'm going to ask you 2 random questions before I let you go. Okay. And one of them is, given your journey and your enlightenment and everything else, so if I had asked you pre the facilitation and while you were still in the UK to define success, what would you have said, and how do you define success today?
Prior to being involved in this work, my idea of success was accumulation of wealth. I had a lot of emphasis on the fact that if I had money, then I would have control over my life and I would have more independence. I had a lot of emphasis on the fact that the more educated I was, the more choices that were available to me. And I had a lot of emphasis on being able to travel the world and to have new experiences, to be able to see things through new experiences. So a lot of my success ideas were driven by worldly experiences, wealth accumulation, and expanding my education.
Right, which I think is true for so many people.
Yes.
And today, how do you define success?
Today I would actually start in a different place. So all of those things that I just answered for you, I answered outwardly, right? Outside experiences, going somewhere to be educated, accumulating wealth, which means activity and generation and creation, right? So it was all an outward thing, right? So now really what I focus on, and I live by this because I'm doing this with my own children too. My primary objective is that success comes through your relationship with yourself. And
I like that.
Yeah, and so your external reality is not a measure of your real success, but your relationship with yourself is the real measure of success. And the closer you get to actually adoring yourself and loving yourself, not in a narcissistic way, but adoring yourself and loving yourself in a way where you really understand your humanity, the more you will then understand every other human being on the planet, and the more you will then generate from a place of true wholeness and confidence and benevolence, rather than trying to achieve those things, even if it comes at the expense of other people, right? So my concentration now on this idea of success is very much about your relationship with yourself first. And then once you've got that in place, the rest is just like the cherry on the top, which also, interestingly, Pascal, it manifests easier. Because
letting go, accept, believe, and surrender, right? Yeah.
It just happens automatically for you. People like you show up. They just come and sit next to you at the right time, right? It's like these things just happen without you having to consciously and strategically and meticulously fathom it all out for you. You just find that you're being supported naturally. And if your priority becomes to become more conscious, then the rest just falls into place.
Right. Last question, and I've asked everyone this that I've interviewed. Mm-hmm. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, famous or infamous, who would that be? And why?
Pascal. I'm going to sound really odd here.
No, it's okay. There's nothing odd. It's just whatever comes to mind first. And it could be several people. I get that.
Yeah, I actually think I'm privileged enough to be able to have dinner with the people that are the most important around me right now. To have had
that's a great answer.
Yeah, because honestly, to have had the privilege to have met an enlightened mystic like Mother Eliza Dalian, and to be able to be in her company at times when we're just joking around as friends and laughing, or going for a walk, or being able to sit with her, and for her to be able to be taught how to access all these nuances inside, so that I feel whole.
Yeah, you can't really top that. I get that. That would be hard to beat.
There's nothing that's missing, because it's like everything that's wanted or needed is actually here. So I don't have a thing about wanting to line up somewhere to go and meet someone.
Well, I was thinking more, I think, when I asked that question, it's sort of who do you admire, whose ideas could you pick or learn from? But even in that category, in that sense, she's hard to beat. I get that.
It's hard to beat. And also, so not she's hard to beat in the sense of like I want to be her or I want to.
No. But in terms of the content and what you learn, right?
Yeah, because basically everything that you need to learn or access or become available to, once you get access to a lot of these universal energies that are inside you and the creative potential inside you, that's exhilarating. It really is exhilarating.
And powerful.
Yeah, and it feels like a magical life because you don't really know which door's going to open from where and what you're about to step into or what potential you're about to move into. Like if I was to talk to my 6-year-old version or my 8-year-old version or my 15-year-old version, I wanted to teach at those ages.
Right.
But my career went off into chartered accountancy and it went off into becoming a chief executive. I was teaching in a different way, but it wasn't the type of teaching I really hoped for. And yet I thought it was classroom teaching, but look where I've landed now. Like that potential of what I wanted as a young kid has transpired, but not through any of my own premeditated working out. It happened through the journey I've lived, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kindi. I appreciate it. It's always amazing talking to you. So thanks for taking the time.